Hello everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about perception in this video. This chapter of your textbook in this unit generally really takes the perspective that perception is kind of our window into our realities. So if you think about that as a metaphor, looking through a window, not only does our perception really frame our sense of the world and what is outside of us. But it also can filter, just like the glass in a window filters how we see things. So does our perception. We can talk about, seeing things through rose-colored glasses, right? As a way of saying we see the world in a really positive way. But that's kind of a good metaphor for understanding how perception works. But the other really important things to understand about perception is that it really is a process. It's not objective, and it really can lead us to either communicate really well, or it can also lead us to communicate kind of poorly. So the process of perception is that first you sort of select certain things over other things to pay attention to. And that is kind of the first step in which we don't see objectively at all. For some people, some bits of information are just going to be more salient, more important looking or seeming than other pieces of information. So this is kind of like we see what we want to see, right? So we select things from our environment to look at. Then we sort of engage in punctuation, or we engage in sort of organization where we start categorizing things. And then we interpret that information based on our experience, our previous experiences in the world and what we know about the world. If you look at little kids and how little kids start to process information, they often overgeneralize things, right? So they'll learn, okay, this four-legged or this animal is a cat. It has four legs and a tail. Therefore, every animal that I see that has four legs and a tail is a cat, right? So they start overgeneralizing. So that's a way that we continue to overgeneralize. It can contribute to stereotypes, right? Every white person is like this. Right. So you can see how kind of race and class and ethnicity and all these different things are based on kind of overgeneralization. So those can become stereotypes. But everything is based on sort of schemata that we form, or these mental categories and frameworks for understanding things. A really important part of perception is our ability to attribute behavior to certain things. So that's what I'll spend kind of the remainder of this video talking about, because it's a really important part of how we make judgments about the world, and particularly about other people and other people's behavior. So there's two different types of attributions. There's internal attributions and external attributions. And an internal attribution assumes that someone's behavior occurred because of who they are as a person. And an external attribution assumes that the behavior that is occurring occurs because of some kind of external event. So an example of an internal attribution would be, I did very well on this exam because I am a rock star student, right? Because that's just who I am. I'm very, very smart, right? But an external attribution would be, I did very well on the course because I had a lot of support from my instructor. Okay, so it's not attributing the behavior, doing well in the course or doing well in an exam, to being a rock star. It's attributing doing well in the course because you've had support from outside, from your instructor, from family, or whatever. Okay, so that's kind of the basic distinction. But we have a lot of errors that occur in attributions, meaning that we oftentimes attribute things to external or internal causes sort of arbitrarily. Well, not arbitrarily, but they're not ever sort of accurate. So let me get into that a little bit more. There's what's called the fundamental attribution error, and that is the tendency to attribute other people's behavior to internal causes. And that really is about, if you see someone cut you off in your car, for example, they cut you off. Our first sort of go-to instinct is like, that person is a mean, terrible person, and that's why they cut me off, right? Instead of saying, well, maybe they didn't see me, or attributing it to an external thing. And then there's the actor-observer effect, which is the tendency to attribute our own behavior to external causes, except for when it's positive. So this always is sort of serves a self-serving bias. It really so what that says is I did well on the exam because I'm a rock star. But if I do poorly on the exam, if it's a negative behavior, then I'm going to always say that it's external, right? So, well, I did bad on the exam because it was a terrible test. It was so hard. My teacher's terrible. You know, my roommate kept me up all night, whatever, right? But it's always an external cause unless it's positive, and then we're like, oh no, that's because I'm wonderful. So we all do this. And then there's another quick thing I wanted to talk about, just halo and horns attributions. The halo effect, in terms of how we view other people. If it's a person that we like, and they have a positive behavior, we're going to attribute that to an internal cause. If it's a person we like and they have a negative behavior, we're going to attribute that to external causes. So that's the same bias that we hold for ourselves, right? If it's good, it's because you're a good person. If it's bad, it's because something happened that's external to you, beyond your control. And then the horn effect is if we dislike the person, we're going to, and they have positive behavior, we're going to attribute that to an external cause. And if we dislike that person and they show negative behavior, we're going to sort of attribute that to internal causes. So all of these things reinforce our sort of biases, whereas we're awesome and the people we like are awesome. And if we do anything wrong, it's because of things that are out of our control. Whereas if it's people we don't like, we're gonna assume that they're just terrible on the inside. And if they're good in any way, it's because things outside of them cause them to be. So interesting how we do that. And, you know, that's one of the fundamental ways that we relate to other people in the world. And so being aware of how we attribute things and our sort of biases can help us to become more competent communicators. There's a lot more in your chapter here, and really it talks a lot about cultural influences, the ability to reduce uncertainty, which is kind of a really primary compulsion when we meet someone, is we really want to reduce uncertainty about the other person and about ourselves. So you'll want to know about that. And the other thing that that's important about this chapter is kind of understanding personality and how we understand personality, because that's one of the most important ways that we sort of, that affects our perception of the world, is who we are as people, our personalities. So there's a lot of different ways of understanding them, understanding personalities, and being able to be reflexive about what our personality is can help us become more competent. And then the last thing is how we sort of create impressions of other people to begin with, right? I just talked about attribution. So if we like someone or not like someone, that's a big force in how we perceive the world and them. But how we form those impressions to begin with is based on gestalts, which are mental pictures that form very, very rapidly. That's why sort of our very initial impressions of other people are so important. And then algebraic impressions are sort of very careful evaluations of new information that we can make. And then stereotypes, which we kind of began this lecture with, is just this categorization of people, these overgeneralizations of people into social groups. And then the evaluation of them based on information related to those groups. So really, stereotypes want everyone within a particular category to be the same because that's easier, right? That's a way of organizing our world. But the problem is that, you know, people are too complicated for that, right? And we never can find sort of a one general rule that fits everyone, even if they're in the same social, ethnic, racial, gendered, cultural group. So, really, to improve perception in general, you really want to have more empathy. You want to have a sense of world-mindedness, which your chapter talks about a lot. And you also want to check your perception. If you're making attributions about other people that are primarily negative, for example, or are reinforcing your ideas about who they are, maybe check your perception and maybe think about how you're attributing their behavior. And that might lead to better interactions in the future, right? The self-fulfilling prophecy can also happen with other people. So think about how changing your perception might change the way you view the world and other people in there. All right. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.